Are there any reasons to be excited about the 2025 Dallas Cowboys? We'll discuss on this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. On today's show, we are answering your Twitter questions. And I put out the call today, Landon, for questions.
Yeah.
And you can tell that people are excited to talk about this team in a good and a bad way. So we've got plenty of questions. The first one comes from Charlie. He wants to know, a year ago, we felt helpless about this team's condition.
Yeah.
Today, there's a sense of excitement with the new coaching staff. How do we feel about the team this year compared to last year? Is there a reason to be optimistic? And I want to pair that with another question.
Yeah.
This one comes from Swindeezy. He wants to know, discuss why a lifelong Cowboy fan should stay committed to this dumpster fire. So kind of basically combining those two together.
Man, I don't know if we could just lump in that last one, because that last one seems like a very comprehensive question, right? I'll say this. Look, I think, followers of this show that have been listening to it for a long time, I think y'all remember how we felt kind of walking into the season last year, that it felt like after I cannot stop referring to this Packers game, but I do feel like it was a real crux moment in the franchise, right? After that loss to the Packers, a lot of us, it's certainly the two of us, were looking for change. We're looking for something different in the organization. And I
just
think
felt like
that
a tipping point for the franchise, right?
It did. Yeah, absolutely. It's just like, when is enough? And when is, kind of tinkering around the edges not going to be enough to kind of push through, right? And so I think, going into the season last year, knowing McCarthy was coming back, that they were going to go through the contract situation with Dak and CD, I think that, if you're talking about how you felt about the team, and let's take out the fact that the Eagles just won the Super Bowl and how ultimately depressing that is and everything like that. I think if you talk about how you felt about the team, I think I felt more dread, let's put it that way, going into the season last year, as I certainly do at this point now, right? And I think that has everything to do with the level of kind of certainty, that what we were walking into last year. There really wasn't too much opportunity for a surprise or for us to be kind of delighted by an outcome. Even the draft was very, kind of chalk is what we expected. You got what you expected to kind of get out of it. I think Cooper Beebe was an exciting surprise, right? But outside of that, I don't feel like there was a lot that happened in the offseason that made you feel like the outcome was going to be any different than it had been previously, right? I think the difference this year is, despite our initial misgivings with Schottenheimer being hired and that being kind of a retread situation and us going, oh no, here we go again. It's the same old kind of rolling back around. I think everything that has happened subsequently to the hiring of Brian Schottenheimer has gone in a completely different direction that we have not seen a Cowboys offseason go so far as coaching hires go. And again, as I'm constantly reminded in the comments of these YouTube shows and in my social media, it doesn't really matter much until we get to free agency and we see if their free agent tendencies have changed. But everything that we've seen along the way has seemed to indicate that this team is kind of trying to go into new directions and try to actually change big aspects of this team. So I think this is a very long-winded way of saying there's a lot more unknown around this team that could go either way, positive or negative. And to me, I'll take that. I'll take the unknown, with that there's hope in there somewhere, versus kind of marching into what seemed like the same old that we got last year after losing the Packers game and then basically doing nothing during the season.
And I'll actually argue it wasn't exactly the same old because it was a lesser roster.
It's true.
With
Yeah.
lesser coaching staff. You lost Dan Quinn. We really liked Mike Zimmer. We thought that was like maybe the best hire they could make. In the meantime, I don't think things worked out for Zimmer because of a lot of injuries, a lot of things we could discuss.
And the timing of having a new defensive coordinator. Yeah, that's all of that.
And then on top of just we knew there was going to be a mass exodus of talent on this roster, but to lose Tyron Smith, Dorrance Armstrong, Dante Fowler, Tony Pollard. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. I mean, they lost a ton of talent, and they really didn't replenish really any of it outside of what they did in the draft. It was hard. It was hard to talk yourself into, hey, they're going to be better this year with a worse roster and probably a worse coaching staff. Now, there's a chance that the Cowboys have a worse roster this year and a worse coaching staff, but at least there's some unknown, as you mentioned. Like maybe Brian Schottenheimer is the type of coach that can help get this team to the next level. And maybe the influx of coaches outside of the organization can bring some new life to this team that desperately needs it. Again, I'm not saying that they're going to be a contender or a Super Bowl contender or anything like that this year. I just think there is some of this. There's some excitement because we don't necessarily know what it's going to look like.
Yeah, I think the thing is that we all agree that the middle class of the Cowboys roster has to get better, right? Has to be a much more talented group than it has been in the previous 2 seasons. I think we can convince ourselves that there's some hope is that once that does happen, maybe when you mix in all that talent with this new coaching staff that has new ideas and they're trying, new concepts in the run game and the defense, maybe that's the thing that kind of helps them break through, right? That obviously line one for this team is the talent's got to get better than where it is right now. But then once it does, can this new coaching staff be the thing that kind of changes all the angles for a fully loaded Cowboys roster and helps them break through where they're kind of banging their head in the ceiling?
I also think they're in a better salary cap spot now than they were last year. Now, again, you can manipulate the cap however you want it. So don't let the Joneses lie to you and tell you that they don't have the money to spend. But I do think they've kind of cut some of the middle spending of their roster.
Yeah.
Some of the players like Terrence Steele are getting like to the end of their contracts. Some of the contracts like Michael Gallup, I don't remember if Michael Gallup's contract is off the books now for this year.
I think this is the first year that it's off finally. Yes.
So you're starting to get some healthier numbers on your books. Now, again, I think it's going to take a couple more years of doing this for that to be completely, fine or whatever. But I do think that things are trending in the right direction. It's just how quickly can they go from being a middle team in the NFL to back to being a contender, and how quickly can they get this roster to being pretty top heavy to being solid all the way around? I'm not sure.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too that kind of weighed on the front office all offseason was getting those 2 contracts done, right? Like, I mean, getting CD and Dak signed, and I think it really did take a toll on they have everything kind of so lined up in a spreadsheet, that when things don't work out like that, it takes them a little while to kind of get it going the way they need to in order to kind of fulfill their plans. So I think that hopefully they've learned to be a little bit more flexible in those situations, knowing that, hey, we still have business that we have to operate no matter how much these contracts end up at being. So we'll see how they handle the Micah situation and how they handle free agency this year. Obviously, like I said, that's the big thing. But your hope is that it was a lot of confluence of events last year and a lot of kind of trying to reconfigure the cap, like you said. But you also mentioned it, like just the fact that they're not going into the situation, losing several beloved longtime Cowboys, going into a situation where you knew that they were going to have to take a step back after losing in the division round. I think that's really what it is that the hangover of knowing that was the Cowboys' best shot for a little while. It bled into 24 a little bit, and then once the injuries started to pile up, it just became a dumpster fire going off a cliff.
All right, let's talk about a potential offensive line shuffle that the Cowboys could make this offseason. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. As a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind. So when it's time to hire, you need a partner that works just as hard as you do. And that's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, and get qualified candidates all in one place. Post your job with LinkedIn's new feature that can help you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip: add the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture to double your reach to qualified candidates. It's no wonder 72% of small businesses say that LinkedIn has helped them find high quality hires. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That is linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are answering your mailbag questions, and we've got some really good ones. And again, I'm going to pair a couple of these together. The first one comes from East Coast Cowboy. He wants to know, could the new offensive line coach slide Cooper Beebe to right guard and insert Brock Hoffman at center? And then the second one comes from, oh man, I think I lost it. From Mike. He wants to know, it's harder to find franchise left tackles, or Steven, harder to find franchise left tackles. Would it make sense to move Tyler Smith to left tackle and go look for someone like Will Hernandez, who played under Clayton Adams at Arizona, and sign him to play left guard in the NFL? So
That's a lot.
a lot of switching around here, but do you think it's possible that we could see major changes on this offensive line?
I think it's possible. I mean, I think, it mostly feels like they have the elements they need for a starting interior three. It feels like, if they wanted to. I do think that if, I don't hate the idea of what the first writers suggested of having Hoffman kind of slide into center, sliding BB out to guard, which obviously he played extremely well in college.
All-American.
All-American, right? And then, I think that could be a very, very good interior three. I think, especially considering, Adams's not preference, but propensity, I guess, for using all different types of offensive linemen. You don't necessarily need to have, like, first round picks at all 5 spots, right? So I do think that what we saw from Hoffman is that, despite early indications, this guy is just a battler, and when he gets on the field, he's a gamer. I think he can be a starting center. But I also
do you think his game is better at center? I mean, we didn't really get to see it a lot last year, so it is some projecting, but do you think he's a better center than guard?
I don't know. And I think that's why I wanted to see him more, is because I think I don't imagine that there's any aspect of the physical parts of playing center versus guard that would be more difficult for him if he can play guard, right? I think, for me, when I think about what a center is, I think, they need to be a certain amount of football IQ, intelligence, pattern recognition. Brock Hoffman seems to have all of that in spades, so I wouldn't be shocked.
And some nastiness that you,
and that's the other thing, right? Tone setter, and I think that's the thing that why you want Hoffman on that offensive line, is because, look, you can say what you want about Tyler Smith. I think he's big. I think he's strong. He will beat people up. You can say what you want about Terrence Steele. I think he, in the run game, he can bully some folks. I think that Cooper Beebe is a guy that, likes to put people in the dirt, for sure. There's still something different about Brock Hoffman. He has that kind of nastiness that you need on an offensive line in order to kind of just intimidate the defense a little bit. So I like having that on there. So, having said that, I wouldn't be shocked if they found an upgrade that they liked there. And tackle is a lot more complicated, right? You just spent a first round pick on a guy. I'm certainly not willing to give up on Tyler Guyton. Especially after I feel like was kind of a mishandling of him.
Well, I think this is just, if you put him back at right tackle, you put him back to the position where he played in college. And maybe the Cowboys feel like you can get better play out of him at right tackle.
I think if your idea is to get, if you're trying to get rid of Terrence Steele, I'm okay with trying to go that route a little bit of like shuffling guys around and thinking about Tyler Smith at left tackle. Though I gotta tell you, like, I like Tyler Smith at left tackle, but I don't love him at left tackle necessarily. I love him at left guard. I think he would be a better than average in the NFL at left tackle, but he's a all pro left guard.
So, well, I guess it just depends on what you value, because I mean, I think the Chiefs were having this conversation throughout the playoffs where it's like, we have such a problem at left tackle, so we're moving our all pro left guard and Joe Thuney out the left tackle, and we're playing a lesser player at guard. I mean, it ended up working because they got to the Super Bowl, but they clearly made a all pro player worse, but they thought the trade-off was worth it.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's the ultimate problem though, is that when it really starts to get to, to the Super Bowl and you're playing talented guys like the Eagles, Thuney can get by, I think, playing left tackle, but it's tough playing left tackle against Josh Sweat, against Nolan Smith. So, I tend to think that I don't hate the idea of Tyler Smith playing left tackle, because, again, I think he could be a better than average guy and maybe even a Pro Bowler at left tackle. I just think he's otherworldly at left guard. And I also think that you've thrown away a season of development at left tackle with Tyler Guyton. I think if you just move him back to right tackle, you're not throwing it away, but you know what I'm saying? Like, if you're going to move him to right tackle, I want it to be with the purpose of, okay, we're looking to move on from Terrence Steele. We're going to use Terrence Steele's money to sign Osa. We're moving Guyton over to the right tackle, and then we'll draft a left tackle, right? Like that's a plan to me. Because then at least you're doing something specific. But I don't think that just moving Tyler Guyton to the right side to hope that that's like a better situation is a better plan than continuing to try to work him on the left side with a new offensive line coach who maybe has a better propensity with working with younger players.
I think if you're trying to get your best 5 offensive linemen on the field, it's probably what we saw like at the end of last year, where it's Guyton, Smith, Beebe, Hoffman, and Steele. But I look at that 5 and I think it's still not good enough for where the Cowboys need to be. So which position do you want to upgrade? Well, it's not Tyler Smith at left guard, right? It's probably not Cooper Beebe at center. And then it comes back to Hoffman, Steele, or Guyton. And I don't know what you do with those 3 guys. I don't know how you figure it out where you get the best 5 on the field or which positions you target in the draft. I want them to be better. I'm not sure what the best combination is yet.
Yeah, and I think it's going to, look, all the angles are about to change because of the new offensive line coach too.
Yes.
How their run blocking is going to be different. So the needs are going to be different there. And it could be that Clayton Adams comes in here with a more, counter-based power run game in a different type of style of protections that he wants to use. And he looks at this group and he goes, you know what? I think that Hoffman is a great young player, but I don't know that he fits what we want to do. I can't really consider him a starter, so we need a third interior guy. So I think, and this is all assuming that Zach Martin's not coming back, and that obviously if he comes back, that throws a whole other thing into it. So,
well, I wanted to ask you about that because I saw Pro Football Focus, which has been incredible at nailing like the projections for free agents. They just updated the projections on Zach Martin, and it was 1 year, $6.5 million.
Yeah, I think I probably would do that. I mean, I don't know. I think that might be a situation that, like, I don't know if I want to bring back both Martin and Steele. Let's put it that way. How about that? Well, like, if you wanted to move on from Steele, you could use some of that savings to put towards Martin, maybe a little more towards Osa. And then now you're trying to figure out the tackle situation, which maybe you needed to do that anyways. Who knows?
Well, if you bring back Martin for a year, does that make it more likely that Tyler Smith kicks out to left tackle? And then you slide Guyton over to right tackle and just play Zach Martin, Beebe, Hoffman as your 3 interior guys?
Maybe. I don't know that I think the front of the pocket is more important. So to me, I think at this point with
so you would rather have
in his career. So I think I'd rather have Tyler still in the inside if you can.
So the hard part is now you're putting Brock Hoffman back on the bench.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is why this is a complicated conversation because honestly, we haven't even discussed tight ends. Are they going to use tight ends more often than they have been previously? Is there going to be more 12 personnel? Because if that's the case, maybe you can afford to kind of keep the center of your pocket strong and have tackles that are on a learning curve because you have more tight end help potentially. So I think the protections and how Clayton wants to run the protections is going to be a big part of this. The personnel groups that they're going to use is going to be a big part of these decisions. I think we're making these decisions based on how the offense was previously run, right? And I think that's where we may need to still get some more information exactly about what Clayton Adams is looking for to make informed decisions there.
All right, Landon, let's talk about trading down in round 1, which the Cowboys did last year to grab Tyler Guyton and select Cooper Beebe in round 3. Could they do it again this year for a wide receiver? We'll discuss that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. We absolutely love FanDuel here on the Locked On Cowboys podcast. But unfortunately, football season is over. But that doesn't mean you have to stop watching sports. We've got basketball going on right now. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started. And there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip-off, or just want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for a big payout, you can even combine your live bets and do a same game parlay. I love FanDuel's app. It's so easy to use. It's so convenient. Plus, when I win, I get paid instantly. It's fantastic. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That is FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets and make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the new Locked On NFL show. 2 shows every single day. 1 in the morning with Tyler Rowland, 1 in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins, available wherever you get your podcasts. All right, ladies, the last question comes from Phil, an everydayer here in the Locked On Cowboys podcast. He said, according to yesterday's podcast, where we talked about the first round wide receivers in this class, what would you fellas prefer? A, draft Ted McMillan or Luther Burden at 12, assuming that both are there or one of them is there, or trade down to pick 18, 19, draft Emeka Egbuka and get an extra second, third round pick.
Here's my issue generally with the trade down conversation is that hypotheticals don't really work here because it matters who the person is that you're trading away from, right? So I guess in this situation, I'd want to know.
Let's do it each scenario. Like, let's say Tet is on the board at 12, and you are getting an offer to go down to 18 to pick up, let's say, a second round pick, because that's a pretty big drop. So from going to 12 to 18, and you get a second round pick.
So are they hypothetically coming up for Tet? Is that what the idea is? Okay. Yeah. I mean, I probably would do the trade down in that situation, right? I think the difference between how I feel about Tet and Amuk and Luther and those guys, I think is a second or third round pick would probably do it just to have another player. I think that's worth that kind of trade.
Would you do it for a third? Because I don't think I would do it for a third. That's too big of a drop for me.
I think I would do it if it was Burton only, but not if Tet was there. Let's say that.
And I think that's where I'm at. Like if you're trading down from Burton and getting Egbuka in a third, I think I would do that, but I wouldn't do it for Tet. The hard part is that would you do it for if Tet was available? Would you take the second in Egbuka for Tet? I think I would as well, to add another top 50 pick for a roster that desperately needs the depth. I could see that.
Yeah. I think it would matter where the pick is, but and that's the thing. I was talking to somebody on Twitter about this too. Like the details on these sort of things, on the trade backs, like the specifics of who's available and why this trade is happening matter, right? Because it's people talk about in general, like how they would prefer to trade back. But the question is always like, who's going to be there at 12 that a team would be willing to give up premium picks to come up to get? but the Cowboys wouldn't be interested in picking themselves, right? Like that's why it's always like it's a tough needle to thread, is because there's got to be a player there that the Cowboys A, don't want, and B, is good enough to be someone to be willing to trade up for. So
all right, well,
that's always my issue there.
Let me give you a scenario.
Yeah.
You can go check. I have an article out on the 33rd team where I had the Bengals franchise tagging T. Higgins and then trading him to Washington for a second round pick. So basically, at least they get something, right? The Bengals drafted 17. If Ted is available at 12, I could see the Bengals wanting to jump some of these other teams that are ahead of them to go get Ted, who I think is very similar to T. Higgins. You get him on a cost controlled deal. I think the Bengals coming up makes sense. You also look at the teams directly below the Bengals, like Tampa Bay, Denver, Pittsburgh, Chargers, Green Bay. All of those teams need wide receivers.
Need a
So
one.
I wouldn't be surprised if you see some of these teams trying to get inside the top 12 to 13 picks to make sure they get 10.
That makes sense to me, because I do think that Tet is really the only guy in this group. I mean, maybe you could squint and tell yourself that Burton or depending, I guess, how you want to handle Hunter, you could make him Hunter a wide receiver one. But I think that Tet feels like the only guy that teams are truly going to target as a guy that they would make potentially a centerpiece of their offense, like a wide receiver one, right? So I could see that him being a guy that fits that mold, right? Because maybe the Cowboys, there are other wide receivers, right? And there are other wide receivers that the Cowboys might value close to Ted, that a second round pick would more than make up the difference. Right. So in scenarios like that, it makes sense. But I think for Luther Burden, I just don't see anybody necessarily trading up. And honestly, like, I don't think it's worth the mess for the Cowboys at that point to trade down, and they probably just stand and make their pick there.
Yeah. I doubt Luther Burden is somebody that a team's going to give up their first and their second to go get. But maybe
definitely a second, but I mean, maybe a third, right? But
maybe you see a team going from 16 to 12 to give up, and they give up their third to jump up and get Burden. Maybe, right? But maybe not. I do think it's an interesting thought to think that the Cowboys could trade down. I will tell you, every time I do one of these mock draft simulators, I get to pick 12, and there's like 4 to 5 guys that I like that I would be comfortable drafting at that spot. Yeah. And I'm always like, hey, let me trade down to 17, and I'll take Emeka Egbuka. I'll take Tyler Warren if he's there. I'll take Michael Williams, who I did a mock draft today. Like, I think there's a good chance that this draft plays out where it's very favorable for the Cowboys to trade down if they can pull it off.
I think that the last part is what I keep on harping on, though, especially in a draft like this. I just don't know there's going to be a lot of people looking to trade up in such a plateaued talent to draft. Like, after the first 6 or 7 guys, all the talent is basically the same for 2 rounds maybe. So the key is going to be finding someone who's willing to give you picks to trade around for. Because
I got one more guy. One more guy that I could see that teams are trying to trade up to go get, and you're going to hate it. I do think Tyler Warren is somebody that teams could try to come up and get, because there are so many teams that have big tight end needs, like the Colts, like the Bengals, like the Broncos. And I just think that Warren is such a unique player that maybe we see teams trying to get up inside the top 12 to get him.
I mean, look, I'm a huge Tyler Warren fan, obviously, but if you're going to give me a second round pick to move back a couple of spots, I also can make do with Jake Ferguson and Luther and Burton and an extra second round pick. I definitely can win with that too.
If Tyler Warren ends up running in the low 4.5s at the NFL Combine, like a lot of people think he will, I think we're going to hear a lot more chatter about Tyler Warren, maybe not even making it to the Cowboys pick at 12, which would be kind of funny to see play out. All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube. Download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosier, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.